My father stole my identity to hide his crimes. I spent 2 years in prison for what he did. Now he wants a second chance. I gave it to him, just not the way he expected. Most kids think their dads are superheroes. I used to be one of them. Mine wore a uniform, fought fires, pulled people from burning wreckage. At parades, children waved at him from sidewalks like he was a comic book come to life. Grown men shook his hand with reverence. Women whispered his name with awe. At home, he was a different man. He wasn't a monster in the way that left bruises you could photograph. No. He was subtler. Sharper. A master of invisible wounds. I learned early on that fear didn't have to scream, it could whisper. His discipline came in layers, the sudden cold silence, the condescending smile when I failed a math test, the public stories about my laziness that got him laughs and me glares. My mother. She stood beside him like a shadow. Never interrupting. Never defending. Always too quiet, too careful. At 8 years old, I was already terrified of making him angry. By 10, I stopped telling jokes because, "Your timing's awful," was better than the look. You know the one, the narrowed eyes, the barely contained disappointment that said you're the problem, and you should feel lucky I even notice. He controlled everything, what I wore, what I read, how long I could be on the computer. My first job was his idea, my first bank account opened under his supervision. "It's better this way," he'd say. "Kids don't understand money. Let me handle it." So I let him. What choice did I have? When I got my driver's license at 16, he added me to his insurance, to save on costs. When I turned 18 and needed a credit card for college apps, he co-signed it, because banks don't trust kids. I thought he was helping me. It wasn't help. It was a slow tethering. By the time I realized I had no financial autonomy, I was 24. I still lived at home, not because I wanted to, but because every job I applied to mysteriously rejected me. My applications disappeared, my bank statements didn't match what I earned, and somehow, I was in debt even though I barely spent. Every time I asked questions, he gave the same excuse. "You're not ready for the real world. Trust me, I'm protecting you." That line haunted me in prison. Because when I was finally arrested, when the detectives laid out the evidence, forged accounts, stolen identities, fraudulent claims, it was his signature everywhere, just using my name. And all I could think was, he was never protecting me. He was building a prison long before the bars were made of steel. It didn't happen all at once. At first, it was just weird little glitches. A transaction for $312 at a sports equipment store I'd never visited. An overdraft fee on a debit card I hadn't touched in weeks. Then a rejection letter for a credit card I never applied for, citing a delinquent payment history. I laughed it off at first, thought maybe some mix-up had occurred. Then came the job interviews. I had 2 promising callbacks for junior accounting positions. Both phone interviews went great. The recruiters sounded excited. Then, nothing. Radio silence. I followed up. One of them finally responded, hesitant, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm sorry," she said, "but something came up during your background screening. Your credit, it's not what we expected for this role." That night, I sat at my desk and opened up my first credit report. I had to reread it 3 times. For credit cards I'd never seen. A personal loan. Missed payments. Delinquent balances. Someone had even used my name to lease a used Lexus in a town I hadn't visited in over a year. And it wasn't just open fraud, it was consistent. Structured. Everything lined up too perfectly to be the work of a random cyber thief. The social security number matched. So did the old home address. The recovery email listed was my childhood email, the one my father had helped me create when I was 12, the one we both had the password to. I confronted him the next morning. He was in the garage, cleaning the lawnmower, shirtless, beer on the windowsill, humming some 80s song like his life was golden. "Dad," I said, holding up the printed report. "What is this?" He didn't look at it. Just wiped grease off his hands and said, "What's it look like?" "It looks like someone's stolen my identity. There's a car lease, credit cards, loans." "So report it," he said. "Call the companies. That's what they're there for." I paused, heart pounding. "You didn't do this?" That made him stop. He turned and met my gaze, calm, unreadable. "You think I'd steal from my own son?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to believe the man who once carried me on his shoulders through Disneyland would never take a dime from me, let alone wreck my life. But there were things I couldn't unsee. Things like the gym charge under one of the fraudulent accounts, his gym. Or the recurring auto payments to his favorite cigar shop. Or the monthly donations to the Firefighters Association in his name, billed to an account in mine. The pieces started to fall faster after that. My credit score plummeted below 500. Debt collectors began calling me daily. One even showed up to the house, a thick-necked man in a wrinkled suit asking about a $5,200 unpaid balance from an electronics wholesale site. My father stepped in before I could say anything. "He's not here," he told the man. "Wrong house." We were standing in the same driveway. I was 10 feet away. The man left, but that was the moment I knew, Dad wasn't just hiding something. He was using me. All those warnings growing up, don't waste money, don't trust banks, let me handle your accounts, they weren't to protect me. They were to trap me. And the trap had worked. So I dug deeper. I pulled every bank record I could find. Opened my old email, where I found dozens of suspicious login notifications I had ignored before. I cross-referenced delivery addresses from the fraudulent accounts. 2 were shipped to a P.O. box under my dad's name, registered a year ago. I thought I had time to figure it out. Maybe even confront him again. Maybe go to a lawyer. I didn't. A week later, 2 federal agents knocked on the door at 6:42 a.m. They read me my rights in front of my mother, who stood frozen with her coffee mug halfway to her lips. They listed off charges like they were reading grocery items: wire fraud, tax evasion, identity theft. My wrists were cuffed. My backpack searched. My laptop seized. I tried to explain. "You've got the wrong guy. I didn't do any of this." But the evidence was all in my name. My address. My digital footprint. At the station, they showed me screenshots of logins, phone calls made from my number, even security camera stills, grainy, low-res photos of someone using my ID at a gas station that looked eerily like me. But I knew that walk. I knew that body language. It was him. And the final blow? As I was being led to holding, I saw him, my father, standing outside the glass doors. Calm. Not scared. Just watching. He didn't try to speak to me. He didn't look sad or shocked. He just gave me a slow nod, turned, and walked away. The court hearings moved fast. Faster than I thought justice ever would. I had a public defender, overworked, underpaid, and just tired enough to see me as another folder in a stack, not a person. He didn't believe I was innocent. Not really. He believed I was caught up in something, like I had a friend who dragged me into the mud, not a father who built the pit around me. The prosecution painted me as brilliant and methodical. A financial criminal with a high IQ and a low moral center. They had paperwork, digital trails, timestamps, security footage. They had motive. He had access to financial training. The D argued, he was familiar with spreadsheets, tax loopholes, crypto markets. I'd majored in accounting before I dropped out. A perfect narrative. They even had testimony. 2 of the credit cards had been used to rent a storage unit, and the owner of the complex remembered, a tall guy with a serious face. That was enough. My father was nowhere. Not once did he show up in court. Not for support. Not to deny anything. Not even to watch. My mother sat in the back the first 2 days, but I could tell she wasn't there for me. She was there because she didn't know what else to do. When the verdict came, it was as if time stopped. Guilty. 32 months in federal prison. Credit for time served, but no parole. I remember the bailiff's hand on my arm. I remember my legs going numb. I remember looking back to the nearly empty courtroom and seeing only one familiar face, my older cousin Hannah, who mouthed the words, "I'm sorry," but couldn't meet my eyes. They took me in chains. And that's when everything really broke. Prison isn't like the movies. It's not a gladiator pit or a constant shift threat. It's worse. It's slow. It's suffocating. It eats away at who you are not by violence, though that exists, but by erasing your sense of self. I shared a 6x9 cell with a former insurance fraud investigator who once posed as his dead uncle for 3 years. He was smart. Way smarter than me. He knew systems. Knew people. And after a week of me barely speaking, he finally asked, "What did you do?" I told him everything. Not the prosecution's version, mine. He listened. Quiet, nodding here and there. Then he said, "Your old man set you up." Classic generational transfer of risk. Financial predators don't always wear suits, kid. Sometimes they wear uniforms. That phrase stuck with me, generational transfer of risk. My father didn't just ruin me, he offloaded his own financial sins onto me like I was a blank check. I started remembering every decision he made, on my behalf. Every signature he coached me through. Every account he opened, for my future. It wasn't protection. It was preparation. He had been grooming me for this since I was 16. In prison, I had time, too much time, to map it all out. I wrote down names, dates, account numbers. I kept a timeline on the back of old commissary request forms. I traced the route from the first, accidental, overdraft to the last fake LLC linked to my social security number. I realized he'd taken out a payday loan in my name before I'd even graduated high school. He needed a fall guy. He built me to be that fall guy. And as the anger grew, so did the clarity. He never loved me. Not the way a father should. He respected loyalty, not love. He rewarded obedience. I wasn't a son to him. I was a project. A long con. A meat puppet with just enough intelligence to build trust and just enough emotional trauma to stay blind. I stopped thinking about getting out. I started thinking about what I'd do when I got out. Not just revenge. Not a scene. No drama, no threats, no weapons in the night. I didn't want to scare him. I wanted to dismantle him, slowly, silently, completely. I wanted to become something he couldn't track, couldn't control, couldn't even see. I wanted to become a ghost. So I started studying. The prison library became my sanctuary. I read every book on financial forensics, digital privacy, shell companies, asset tracing. I didn't just want to understand how he did it. I wanted to learn how to erase footprints, and how to trace the faintest ones he left behind. I asked for paper every chance I could. Napkins, scrap forms, and used request slips. I scribbled blueprints of his fraud, his patterns, the fake addresses he'd used, the IPs that logged into accounts on nights I knew I was asleep. I memorized tax codes, offshore routing tactics, the art of structuring, moving money in increments small enough not to trigger alarms. I filed it all in my head like folders: storage unit leads, shell corp aliases, gym payment trail, PO box reassignments, credit pull anomalies. And when I ran out of facts, I began reconstructing his habits. The way he talked. The way he lied. His tells. His moves. I replayed conversations in my mind like surveillance tapes, dissecting his phrasing, his timing. He had always been rehearsed. But now, I could hear the script. The ghost I was becoming wasn't born of rage. Rage fades. This was born of patience. Of precision. I stopped writing letters to the outside world. Cut contact with the few friends who still asked how I was doing. I didn't want anyone knowing what I was becoming, especially not him. He couldn't suspect a thing. When I got out, I needed him to believe I was broken, forgettable. Still his victim. Still too small to matter. But ghosts don't need recognition. They need silence. And space. And when I walked out of that prison gate, 2 years and 4 months after they slammed it behind me, I wasn't free. I was unleashed. When I stepped out of prison, nobody was waiting for me. No tearful reunion. No supportive friends. No second chances. And that was exactly what I wanted. I didn't return to my hometown. I didn't visit old neighbors or check the old address. I didn't even call Hannah, though she'd been the only one who showed up in court. I went where no one knew my name, a rust-worn bus terminal in a city I'd never lived in, with a release check and a duffel bag of used clothes. I found a rundown hostel and paid for a week in cash. The room was smaller than my prison cell, but it had a door I could lock from the inside. That made it better. I spent the first 3 nights sitting cross-legged on the floor with a burner phone in one hand and a borrowed library laptop on the other. No social logins. No synced contacts. No reused usernames. I scrubbed myself off the internet like I was removing mold from tile. Then I built someone new. I spent 2 months working off books, unloading trucks at 4 a.m., washing dishes overnight, changing signage for a shady marketing firm that paid under the table. The pay was trash. The hours were worse. But I wasn't there to live, I was there to vanish. Every spare dollar went into building the new me. I found a former felon through a forum who forged clean birth certificates. Bought one. Used it to file for a social security number under a new name. Opened a PO box. Bought a prepaid SIM card. Built email accounts layered through VPNs and Tor. By the end of the 3rd month, he was dead. And I was born. Jesse Ralston. That's the name I gave myself. Jesse had no debt, no family, no digital noise. Jesse was invisible. A clean slate. A ghost with teeth. Now, it was time to make him dangerous. I used Jesse to apply for remote tech work, low-level digital auditing and back-end QA for app startups that needed cheap labor and didn't ask too many questions. Within 6 weeks, I had steady work. By month 5, I was earning enough to rent a small studio under another alias through a shell lease broker I found online. I kept living like I was broke. Cup noodles. Thrift clothes. Library internet. But my real currency was information. I created bots to crawl my father's known aliases, accounts, LinkedIn posts, company registrations. I traced where his gym membership was now billed. Found 2 new LLCs, one for Hablock Construction Services, another for Unified Property Holdings. He was still active. Still stealing. He hadn't slowed down. If anything, he'd expanded. That told me he believed he'd gotten away with it. Good. The revenge wouldn't be fire and fury. It would be dissection. Quiet, sterile, efficient. I wasn't going to punch him in the face, I was going to bankrupt his soul one paper cut at a time. I started mapping his pressure points. His business, where did his money go? Who were his partners? Who trusted him with capital? His reputation, who still saw him as a hero? What organizations gave him awards, grants, positions? His secrets, who else had been used, and who could be convinced to speak? I made contact with 2 of his former coworkers. Through a freelance identity, I posed as an investigative researcher writing a book on white-collar fraud. One of them told me, off the record, that he always had a knack for fudging numbers when no one was looking. Then came the part I'd waited 2 years for, finding out what he valued most. It wasn't money. It was admiration. The public eye. The legacy. The illusion. My father didn't just want to win. He wanted to be seen winning. And I was going to tear that away from him, not by fighting. Not by warning. But by surgically turning every single person who admired him into someone who pitied or hated him. The ghost was ready. It was time to haunt. I knew I couldn't just attack him. That would be loud, obvious, something he could spin. No, this had to be wrought from within. Quiet. Viral. Untraceable. So I started with the image, the pristine illusion my father had curated for decades. Community leader. Retired hero. Mentor. I wanted to watch those words shrivel like paper in acid. The first move was small. I sent an anonymous tip to the local newspaper's editor, a journalist I knew had once tried to write about budget irregularities in the fire department but was shut down by city officials. I told him a former firefighter had been implicated in several private financial frauds under multiple shell companies, and that he should start by looking into Unified Property Holdings. The next week, an article ran in the City Watch section. It was subtle, just a paragraph buried in a broader piece about shady real estate LLCs, noting how several property deals involving Unified had irregular contracts and aggressive payment defaults. No names. No accusations. But I knew my father saw it. Because the very next day, he updated his LinkedIn to remove the advisor role he had listed under that company. Good. He was nervous. Next, I moved to his personal connections. He volunteered twice a month at a local youth mentorship program, a perfect photo op setup. So I filed an anonymous report to the nonprofit board alleging that a former mentor had come forward with complaints about coercive financial requests. No names. No details. Just enough smoke to spark curiosity. 3 days later, his photo vanished from the organization's website. And it kept going. I built fake burner accounts and joined the Facebook group for the local Retired Firefighters Association. I started sharing public links to lawsuits he had quietly settled, articles he had tried to suppress, and posts where he boasted about mentoring young entrepreneurs. Each post was careful, factual, vague, never outright accusatory. But they spread. Because they were true. People started asking questions. Did you see this? Wasn't he the guy who? Didn't he mentor that kid who got arrested? Every whisper was a scratch across the mirror he'd spent years polishing. But the masterpiece? That came when I found a podcast he'd guested on just 6 months earlier. It was titled, From Firefighting to Fatherhood, Leading with Integrity. It had 5,000 listens. Glowing comments. Shared by local schools. So I downloaded the episode, edited it, and inserted his name into the metadata of every shell corporation he'd opened. Then I created a searchable PDF showing each connection, 1 page per fraud-linked LLC, and titled it, The Other Legacy of Frank Harrow. I uploaded it to every public archive site I could find. Tagged it on Reddit. Linked it to old community message boards. Used bots to comment under articles he was mentioned in, this guy. You seen this doc? Yikes. And then, I waited. The whispers became friction. Friction turned to suspicion. Invitations stopped. Emails went unanswered. One of his old firefighter buddies, a man who once toasted him at a retirement banquet, commented publicly, I always wondered why the kid took the fall. There it was. That one comment. It broke the spell. He wasn't untouchable anymore. He wasn't admired. He was doubted. And once the cracks formed, I knew it was only a matter of time before the whole mask shattered. He had spent a lifetime pretending to be a man of honor. Now he was just pretending to be innocent. And I wasn't done yet. The world no longer saw him as a hero. Next, I'd make sure they saw what he really was. A thief. A liar. A man who sacrificed his own son to protect his ego. The ghost had entered the house. Now it was time to tear down the foundation. Before I could finish him, I had to make sure the floorboards were ready to collapse under his feet. And to do that, I needed leverage, from the inside. That meant gaining access to his partners. The people he fooled. The people who trusted him with their reputations and investments. So I found them, the real estate brokers, construction permit approvers, and bank officers who had worked with him on and off through the years. Most of them never questioned the paperwork he handed them. Why would they? He had the face of a man who saved children from burning buildings. You don't interrogate a local hero. But they all had a weak spot, fear of exposure. So I started with a bank officer named Glenn, who once approved 3 consecutive business loans under my father's fake companies. I used one of my aliases to pose as a fraud investigator, anonymous, corporate, and very serious. I sent him a brief, documents, digital trails, fake letterheads with real registration numbers. I didn't accuse Glenn of anything. I just attached a note that said, "Someone's building a case. You might want to start distancing yourself." 2 weeks later, Glenn quietly filed an internal risk alert at the bank, flagging all accounts connected to Hablock Construction. I was doing to my father what he did to me, surrounding him, cutting off exits, isolating him. And while I was doing it, I kept going back to one night. It was the night before I graduated high school. I had made it, barely. I was never the star student, but I pushed through, even while working late shifts to help with the bills he never paid. I didn't care about the diploma. I just wanted to see him smile. To hear him say, "I'm proud of you." Instead, he came home drunk. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my gown in a plastic bag, showing it to my mom. He tossed it aside and said, "You're not walking. Don't need a crowd watching my kid pretend to be something he's not." I stared at him. "It's just a ceremony," I said quietly. "It's a waste of time," he snapped. "You think a piece of paper changes who you are? You're still gonna end up under my roof, using my money, screwing up my name." And I remember this vividly. My mother didn't speak. She just lowered her eyes and kept stirring the soup. That was the first night I ever thought about disappearing. That was the seed. Now, years later, that seed had grown into something terrifying. Not fear. Not sadness. Precision. I had no more illusions about forgiveness. I wasn't doing this to teach him a lesson. I was doing it because some men don't deserve to keep their castles after they've buried bodies in the foundation. He buried me. Now it was his turn. I planted false investor interest in one of his shell companies, contacted him through a fake firm registered in Nevada. He took the bait immediately. We scheduled a virtual due diligence session. I asked him to prepare full financial statements, client history, and vendor contracts. It was the perfect trap. Because once I had those files he thought were going to help him land $1 million backing, I sent them, anonymously, to the IRS, his local ethics board, and every bank that had ever issued him a line of credit. 3 days later, I got the alert, all known accounts frozen for suspicious activity. 2 more days, Unified Property Holdings dissolved involuntarily by the state. By the end of the week, he was done doing business. And the best part? He had no idea I was behind any of it. Not yet. But he would. Very soon. He called me 2 days after the collapse started. Of course, he didn't know it was me. He called because the walls were caving in, accounts frozen, permits revoked, emails bouncing, investors ghosting him. The confident man who once told me I wasn't worth the ink on my diploma now sounded panicked, breathless. "I need help," he said into the phone, not recognizing the voice on the other end. "I think someone's sabotaging me." I let him talk. He ranted about the banks, the city, the press, those leeches on the internet, all conspiring against him. They want to take everything. And I didn't do anything wrong. That last line made me laugh. Not out loud, not yet. Just enough that it echoed in my throat like a silent scream. That night, I sent the message. Anonymous. Encrypted. A single line and an address. "If you want to know who's coming for you, meet me here tomorrow at 8 p.m. A warehouse. Abandoned. Cold. Just outside the city where it all began. I was already there when he arrived, older now, paler. Dressed in a suit that didn't quite fit anymore. The kind of man who had gotten by on charm and muscle, now reduced to suspicion and sweat. He stepped into the shadows, cautious. "Hello," he called out. "I figured you'd show," I said, stepping forward. My voice had changed. Hardened. He squinted. "Do I know you?" I stepped into the light. And watched his face unravel. It was like watching a mask melt off in slow motion. First, confusion. Then disbelief. Then that brief flicker of regret, not for what he'd done, but for who had survived it. "You," he whispered. "Yes," I said. "Me. The son you buried. The name you stole. The man you destroyed." He stammered, but I cut him off. "No. You don't get to speak yet. You spoke in court. You spoke to the banks. You spoke for me when you filed documents in my name, built lies on my credit, and left me to rot in a cell." He took a step back, as if the truth physically hit him. "I didn't," he began. "I have every contract. Every forged signature. Every transaction. I have emails you thought were deleted. Phone calls you never knew were recorded. And I've been giving them, piece by piece, to the people who once trusted you." He looked panicked now. "What do you want?" he asked. "Money?" I laughed. Really laughed this time. You already took that. You took my job prospects, my diploma ceremony, my 20s. He said nothing. I want something better than money, I continued. I want your name. I want the illusion gone. I want everyone to know what you are, not because I told them, but because you did. I handed him an envelope. Inside, a confession. Written for him. With every detail, every admission needed to finish what I'd started. He opened it, reading with trembling hands. I'm not signing this, he said, eyes darting. You can't make me. You're right, I said. I can't. Then I pulled out a second envelope. This one goes to the media. And the district attorney. And the IRS. It includes a letter from me, your victim, explaining how I was manipulated, groomed, and destroyed. And all the evidence I've collected since. I let that hang in the air. You have a choice. Sign the first one, publicly admit what you did, give up the rest of your assets to restitution and disappear, quietly. Or. I released the second. He stared at the two envelopes. Then at me. And for the first time in my life, I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Fear. Not fear of prison. Not even of losing everything. Fear of being seen. Stripped bare. No heroism. No uniform. No excuses. He signed. Hand shaking, voice barely audible. The pen scratched across the paper like it was bleeding him dry. When he was done, I took the confession, the pen, the envelopes, and turned to leave. You're really not coming back, are you? He asked. I paused at the door. No, I said. You lost the right to call me son the day you turned me into a scapegoat. I stepped into the night, the confession in my pocket, and the ghost of who I'd been finally fading behind me. He had tried to bury me. But I wasn't dead. I was the ghost he built. And I had just burned his empire to the ground. The confession went public the next morning. It didn't take long. News outlets picked it up. A podcast ran a full 2-part episode titled The Hero Who Wasn't. Reddit lit up. Facebook groups that once called him a legend started deleting posts. The city removed his name from the local volunteer center. The youth mentorship program issued an apology. I didn't watch the interviews. Didn't read the outrage threads. I didn't need to. I had already seen the truth, not just about him, but about what happens when you take everything from someone and expect them to stay buried. My name was finally cleared. The state reviewed my conviction. The prosecutor who'd so confidently painted me as a mastermind was forced to issue a statement of procedural regret. The charges weren't dropped, not technically. But the record was sealed, the conviction vacated. That was enough. No parades. No apology letters. No compensation. But I didn't need those, either. I got my own apartment in a different city. New job. New number. The only people who know who I really am are the ones I choose to tell. No more aliases. No more hiding. Just a clean slate. A quiet life. People still ask if I regret what I did to him. I don't. He built a throne on top of my future. I didn't burn it down for revenge, I dismantled it so no one else would ever sit there again. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, hearing the cell door slam. But then I get up. I make coffee. I go outside. And I remind myself. I'm free. He tried to turn me into a cautionary tale. Instead, I became the ending he never saw coming. And in a world full of men like him, that's the only justice I ever needed. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, it helps more than you know. Subscribe and stick around for more true stories with twists, turns, and just the right amount of karma.